high water, including the turbulence of Donald Trump. We can manage through the hard times and nevertheless make progress for a brighter future.
The governor also highlighted medical debt relief and education funding as lawmakers now negotiate the final state budget. Taylor Fleming spoke with some of them.
Democrats were largely positive towards Governor Pritzker's annual budget address shortly after the speech Wednesday. Representative Sharon Chung was happy to see a balanced budget as the blueprint for negotiations, saying that was probably tough with federal funding conditions. One of her priorities is going to be more funding for higher education. Representative Jahan Gordon Booth says the country is at a turning point and praised the governor's words about love for the nation even when things are hard. She said she looks forward to reading the proposed budget over the next few days, making sure to note that what the governor proposed is a starting point and not a finished product. Gordon Booth is concerned about housing prices in the Peoria area, so she will be paying close attention to the governor's housing proposals, like the initiative to deregulate housing construction.
We have to figure out how do we, from the government side, unleash regulation, create more opportunities so that we can build more homes, that we can make sure that Peoria continues to stay an affordable place for people to live and raise a family.
On the Republican side, Representative Ryan Spain says housing is important too. But he wasn't impressed with the governor's proposed initiative, saying it takes too much control away from local government.
We should think about how our policies have driven up the cost of housing in Illinois, the high property taxes we pay and the onerous regulations that exist. We should still let local communities have responsibility for zoning decisions and other features of developing housing.
Spain added that in his view, the speech was mostly about Pritzker's political ambitions on the national stage. He said there was a lot about President Donald Trump and less about the state budget in the governor's address. Another Republican, Travis Weaver, said he would have liked to hear more about property taxes and educational tax credits from the national Big Beautiful Bill, but was happy to see that the governor brought up getting cell phones out of school classrooms. In Springfield, Taylor Fleming, 25 News.